Okay.
So you need to be like in the frame.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about too much.
You want to move that back?
Yeah, sure, we can try moving it back. I don't want it too far. I mean, I don't want it in people's way if they need to get up. Oh, that's good. That's better, huh? Okay, people can read that.
But it's backward though. It is backwards. It's okay. Well, thank you all for coming out here this evening. Thanks very much. This is a topic that I'm really excited and interested in. My name is Matt Deitch, and I'm an assistant professor at the University of Florida out of this West Florida Research and Education Center in Milton. So UF has 10 of these research stations around the state. I'm lucky enough to be here in the Pensacola Bay Area, Pensacola-Reno Bay Area. I'm really happy to be here. My interests are in hydro. I'm sorry. I beg your pardon?
Because you don't know enough.
Right. Well, I've worked in places that are equally contentious. We're here tonight because to talk about stormwater issues and this idea of how we can reduce flooding and improve water quality through actions in our communities. Are there things that we can do in our communities to reduce flooding, to improve water quality? And we can wait for the county forever to do things, but is there something that we can do in communities to help these things? I had a slide for it. Wow. I was proud of myself for remembering this. Yes, that's right. Right. So we're also here. We're here because I'm here with my colleague Evan Bean, who's a professor in engineering in Gainesville, with UF in Gainesville, and we got a grant from the U.S. EPA to look at this issue, to see how we can strengthen community resilience through this idea of flood-based planning in Escambia and Santa Rosa counties. And in particular, we're trying. What we have the goals for this project is to document water quality and discharge, to see what's actually in the water here. And flood sites in Santa Rosa and Escambia counties that's flowing out of these neighborhoods. And to test whether this idea of green infrastructure, these things that Evan will talk a little more about today, can have benefits on flooding and water quality. Things like grassy swales, rain gardens, rainwater catchment cisterns. And then to share results with you over the process so you can see what kinds of things we're finding in water, what kinds of opportunities there might be to improve water quality and flooding, to reduce flooding in our area. And also to share that information with county staff and other people who might be interested in writing grants to try to fund the implementation of these. A big part of this then is that what we want tonight is input from you in the community about where we should work. As I said, I've been here for a little while, but not long enough perhaps to know where the body's buried or whatever. So what I would really appreciate is input from the people in the community about where we might be able to do these projects, where your concerns are about flooding and water quality. So our goals tonight, we'll describe this idea of green infrastructure, share some examples. We'll describe the process that we'll go through data collection, possible sites, and then we'll ask input from you about where you're concerned about flooding, where you're concerned about water quality. So with that, then I'll give it to Evan to talk about. Sure. This is you. Okay.
Well, good evening. As Matt said, my name is Evan Bean. I'm an assistant professor in ag and bioengineering at UF. I work in urban water resources, and particularly in the area of stormwater management and how we manage the increase in runoff that comes from developing our landscapes. One of the main things that Matt kind of touched on that we're looking from you all tonight is your input in this project. It's all fine and good that it's kind of like we come in with scientists and the best answers and solutions, but if the community's not buying into it or they're not involved in the process, a lot of times it doesn't become a successful project, to be perfectly honest. It's sort of like, okay, those people came in here and they did that, but I was not involved in that at all. Right? And so we want to get some input from you about places that have flooded. Maybe the county has documented, maybe it hasn't. Maybe it's something that you see on a regular basis that are areas of flooding. Maybe it's water quality issues that you're seeing in the local areas or in the water bodies that you come into contact on a regular basis. We kind of want to know your perspective on that. Okay? So I want to give you a little bit of information about what green infrastructure, low impact development, what these practices are. What are these ways that we can basically improve the hydrologic or the way that the landscape functions with respect to runoff, flood mitigation, and water quality. So if we look at sort of a map of the Panhandle, this map up here is sort of an estimated population in 2010, sort of the developed areas in red, protected areas, and then everything else that's not developed or protected is this other. And if we look at sort of, this is a projection of 2070, so now we're coming up on only about 50 years away. But you can see sort of the difference with where development is going to really occur. You know, and you know, to be honest, there's not a whole lot of change in Escambia County, except for maybe up in this area. But I assure you there's a lot of change in probably the density here that's going to occur. We see a lot in Santa Rosa County with development in the northern part, and particularly north of the I-10 corridor as you move to the west, or to the east, sorry. But with that comes a lot of the effects of urban development and of putting people into different places. This here is a map of the water bodies that are in the Panhandle area, and every area that you see that's in gray has been identified by the state as basically not having water quality for one reason or another that it's supposed to have. So it might be nutrients, where you have algal blooms, it might be fish kills, it might be dissolved oxygen, it might be bacteria. So there's a lot of different, what's that? Dioxin. There's a lot of different parameters that can cause contamination. But what I kind of want to point out is one thing that's pretty common is a lot of times the urban areas, most of the urban areas is where the water bodies in those areas are under some kind of impairment. So you can kind of a lot of times see where the urban development is on these maps based off of where the impaired water bodies are. And I thought this was kind of funny when I was trying to bring up the map of this, that this layer, the water's not attaining standards, did not draw completely. There may be too many features to display. There's too many watersheds for it to actually load that aren't meeting their water quality criteria. So if that doesn't say that we've got a broad issue around the state, I'm not sure what does. To kind of give you a perspective of where I come from with land development and sort of where the changes that occur affect water quality downstream and how I try to address that, or the perspectives. So a lot of times when we're starting out with sort of an undeveloped area, maybe we have forest area or agricultural land that has very little impervious area, no roads, no rooftops, no concrete. The way that water falls on that area and then is proportioned between water that goes in the ground, water that is held by the soil and then goes back into the atmosphere, or water that runs off, is really in direct response to what's going on the land surface. So for an undeveloped land, we might have 50% of that water that goes into the ground is able to recharge the groundwater. Maybe 40% is held in the shallow soil and crops take it up, the plants take it up and goes back in the atmosphere. Maybe only 10% goes off and runs off into creeks and streams and other water bodies nearby. And so because of that amount of that fraction of water that runs off and goes into streams, the streams kind of adapt to that over the millennia or hundreds of years of not being developed. And so you have these sort of natural streams that have, fairly natural settings where they're very stable, lots of plants, very stable stream paths, and so forth. When we go to development and we increase the imperviousness, so adding rooftops, concrete, roadways, and so forth, we're changing that water balance. We're changing what happens to the rainfall when it falls on the land. And so now maybe we reduce the infiltration to 35%, maybe our evapotranspiration is down to 35%, and runoff goes to 30% in this balance. This is just sort of a general description or kind of overview example here. But we might say, oh, that's only 20% difference, but really that's 3 times the amount of water that's going on the site. And that has dramatic impacts on the quality of the water bodies downstream. You have a lot more water that's coming off the site, and so there's a lot more channel erosion. There's not as much habitat available for insects and the ecology of that area. Here, I'm not sure if you can make it out, but there's large boulders in this stream to keep it from eroding. And there's not the natural functions that keep the water quality from being impaired, kind of improving it. So I kind of work in this area where the red box is, okay? And so we're kind of taking that approach. And so when we think about what happens with a rainstorm, So here it might be sort of, we start out with a rainstorm here over time, and we start out with sort of a light rainfall, and it gets heavy in the middle, and then it kind of tapers off at the end. The response of the rainstorm to generated runoff from an undeveloped or natural area is fairly minimal. Okay, so we have sort of this response where we have sort of some good delay between when the peak rainfall rate is and when the peak of runoff is. It doesn't get up very high, but then when we develop that, we increase the imperviousness, we put in stormwater pipes, we basically connect a lot of that impervious area. We're increasing the total volume of runoff water, and we're looking at increasing the rate so that it's kind of the flashiness is increased. And if we connect that all downstream, then it can really it can lead to a lot of the flash flooding that we see. So this is one of the big issues that we have, is that in the way that we used to do stormwater management, a lot of it was kind of getting it off site as quickly as possible. We wanted to basically go from rooftops, you'll see scuppers here, down into the gutters, out into the street, and into the stormwater pipes, and out into the nearest water body. And in that flow path, it never has a chance or opportunity to go into the ground or be filtered through any vegetation or any kind of natural processes. All right? That's very efficient for getting that water off site, but it's also very efficient at sending that water downstream. And it's fine if it's going off of your site, but it's not fine if it's all coming to you. And this is still a fairly widespread issue, the issue of upstream development causing more and more flooding downstream. We talk about sea level rise. It's somewhat of an issue in this area. We see, for example, here in Pensacola, sort of the projection from here in 2016, starting out here as our reference point, and then looking at somewhere around 15 inches is the average projection of sea level rise in this area. Apalachicola, kind of around the same. Panama City, maybe a little bit less. Okay. It's good if you're up on the bluffs, so that may not be as much of a concern here. I'm going to skip over this one because it's a little too technical, and just let's kind of go on with it. But if we're looking at the stormwater pipe system, when we have the storm pipes draining to a tidal water body here, so it's salt water, and this is where the water would come off the landscape and go flow into that. This is sort of how it should function. But when we have sort of a high water level, or we have king tides or sea level rise, happens is we start to fill up these pipes, and so then they're not available for conveyance, not available for that water to basically flow downstream. And so we get this backup of water where the system is not functioning as well as it should. And so if we have high tide with sea level rise and a large storm event, we're going to have much more flooding than if we had sea level rise and just king tide beforehand. So how do we address this, or how have we gone about basically managing this stormwater runoff problem? We have realized that this is an issue, and so there's been some ways that we have tried to go about addressing this. So this is again our sort of generic storm here, where we have our rainfall pattern, peak in the middle, lighter on the ends. Here's our pre-developed runoff. And so we can kind of take this approach where we say, okay, this is kind of the maximum rate of runoff that happened before the storm, all right? Or before the development occurred. And so we basically say, all right, well, this is the amount of runoff that's going to come off the site after we develop it. What if we basically transform this shape so that we don't exceed this peak runoff rate, all right, this peak development? So basically we have the same volume under here, but we're just stretching it out over a long period of time. And the way that we kind of achieve that most commonly, so this basically has the same volume, reduces the peak rate, and increases our downstream stability. We also get some water quality improvement. But the main way that we are able to do this is through wet or dry detention. I'm sure you've seen stormwater ponds around the area. Believe it or not, there's somewhere close to 100,000 stormwater ponds across the state of Florida. They're everywhere. And what they basically do is they capture that water and basically hold it and then slowly release it. So you'll hear these terms detention and retention, and they're used kind of interchangeably, but technically, think about it like school, all right? So a detention pond, you get held after school just for an hour or so, maybe you had to clean the boards or do something like that, and then you get released. No long-term effects, right? Retention, if you get retained to grade, you're not going anywhere. So basically water is held and then retained on site. It's kind of the difference there. Infiltration basins, we also have some issues there where we need to make sure that we're not over-infiltrating and causing basically groundwater mounding to occur. So there's some issues with trying to focus too much water infiltrating into one place. Even if we have good soils, we sort of have to have some volume of good separation from the groundwater there. So the other issue is that in our developed areas, there's lots of sources of different pollutants that come from different areas. So for roadways, we have PAHs, other organic chains and volatile chemicals, metals that come off of brakes and break down the wear and tear of concrete and asphalt. During construction, we have erosion and sediment that can basically carry phosphorus and other metals that might be in the soil naturally. Fertilization that may be spread onto impervious areas and not taken up, or basically putting fertilizer down just before a heavy rain event. That can lead to a lot of nutrients going into the waterways. And then I love my dog. This is not my dog. It's a very cute dog, but I love my dog, but he's also quite a point source for pathogens and nutrients as well. So we have this issue of water quality that we haven't even gotten to yet in the urban environments. But one way that we can kind of address that, and it's sort of the way that we're trying to push the industry and the better way of doing stormwater management, is to understand that the natural landscape has a certain response to a rainfall event. And if we really want to manage that and mitigate the impacts of it, we need to try to have the landscape in the developed area respond likewise, so that we're not increasing the overall discharge, the overall runoff, the transport of pollutants off the site. So if we don't have as much runoff, or if we're not producing runoff, we're not carrying those pollutants off site. We're not carrying and washing the fertilizer or the metals into the water body if there's no water running off. Okay? So some of the things that occur here is that we match that pre and post volume. So we have the same amount of runoff between the pre and the post development. It implies a peak control, so we don't have that high spike where we have the flashiness. And we're kind of trying to match this long-term water balance. So the same amount of water would be recharging and going into the ground, and the same amount would be running off or going into plants, or going by plants being evapotranspired. How do we do this? When we look at sort of what happens here when we go from sort of the water balance, when we look at natural ground cover, we have about 50% of that water going into the ground, 40% evapotranspirating, 10% runoff. And as we go to the impervious, increase the impervious, we significantly increase the runoff, slightly decrease the evapotranspiration, and majorly decrease the infiltration. So to kind of match that pre and post development, we basically want to take the runoff and convert it to infiltration and evaporation however we can in the landscape. These types of functions are things that we want to incorporate into the landscape. So we want to limit the impervious cover to reduce that runoff production. We also want to distribute how stormwater is managed throughout the developed watershed, right? So how, in a lot of residential or large-scale developments, we're sending a lot of our stormwater into single large basins that might be in the back area of a development, where it's kind of out of sight and out of mind, right? And so this, by retaining that stormwater, we're also retaining the pollutants on site or limiting the discharge of that off site. Okay. So it's sort of a definition that I kind of like here. A lot of words. If it's too much words for you, just give me a second, and then we'll be through it. But the main part here is that LID is a site design strategy for maintaining and replicating a pre-development hydrological regime. With the use of design techniques that create a functionally equivalent hydrologic landscape. It's basically looking at how do we store that water, infiltrate it, and recharge the groundwater, and also managing sort of the discharge volume and how frequently it discharges off-site. So it's kind of looking at how do we keep the water response of the landscape functioning after development. So what do these look like? So you may have heard of sort of rain gardens or bioretention. This is probably one of the more common practices that we see with low impact development or green infrastructure. And the idea here is that a lot of these are sort of localized, distributed depressional areas that are vegetated and are designed to kind of capture runoff from about a 1-inch storm event, maybe a little bit more, 2 inches, 3 inches, but not a major storm event. But basically capture that water, and then it infiltrates through this vegetated media and it basically filters that water before it goes into the ground. Or if we have poor infiltrating conditions, we have really clayey soil, maybe we put in an underdrain here. This basically should pond water for up to 24 hours. So this shouldn't be something where you have water standing for a continuous amount of time. So it should not basically turn into a mosquito pit or anything like that. If it does, then it was designed wrong, or we've got some issues that we need to address. Permeable pavements are probably one of my favorite stormwater practices of green infrastructure. The way that these work are, there's a couple different types here. We have porous asphalt and pervious concrete. These function by the pavement surface taking the fine particles out of the mixture. They're just like the regular conventional asphalt or concrete. You take the fine particles out. And what happens then is you have the large particles left along with what kind of binds all that together. And so what forms is you have these void spaces that are in between the large particles, where those small particles used to be, and those are interconnected voids that allow water to drain or move through the pavement surface. Down below, we typically have sort of a choker course, or pea gravel, and then this sort of this base course is kind of like a 1-inch stone. So there's a lot of void space, but it also kind of supports it can also be used for vehicle traffic. And then that water can move through this very rapidly, and then build up or storage in this stone layer, and then slowly seep into the subsoil around it. Concrete pavers kind of can allow water to drain sort of around them. A lot of times you'll see that there's kind of like a gap between them, the pavers there, and they typically have pea gravel in between them. It's just another common type of permeable pavement. You can kind of see an example here, just sort of cross sections of what we see. Again, if we have sort of a subbase or soil that doesn't really drain very well, then we might put in an under drain that allows that water to basically drain out of the subbase after a certain amount of time. But you can kind of see these different layers of stone here, and sort of these are the concrete pavers. This is porous asphalt, this stone, and then the subsoil underneath it. Subsurface exfiltration, these are really kind of neat structures, basically like half pipes that are put underneath what would typically be a parking lot. So you have these half circle domes, basically, with all this void space in here. So the stormwater gets routed and piped into this, and then it basically soaks through the fabric and in through the stone, and then it seeps into the ground. With this one and permeable pavement, the great thing is that you're kind of matching or using your parking lot and in the same place that you're doing your stormwater management. So you're getting more functionality out of the same space. So other practices are infiltration trenches or dry wells, where we can kind of focus that stormwater into a highly porous or pervious stone matrix, where we have a sort of a large pipe. In this case, water would be routed into this pipe, would flow into here, and then flow laterally into the stone around it, and then slowly seep into the soil around it. There's a lot of surface area here, so it allows that water basically to percolate into the soil around it and get filtered. Swales are a great option as well. A lot of times we tend to see that there are, the convention is to basically put stormwater pipes throughout the landscape, and that moves water very efficiently and very quickly, but this also provides an opportunity for conveyance, as well as for water to infiltrate into the soil and be filtered by the vegetation as it flows through it. And it also provides some flood storage if there's a limited capacity downstream. Some more advanced practices. This is what's called a second-generation nutrient separating baffle box, and this is kind of where you have a stormwater pipe and you basically cut a section out of it, and this is the land surface, and so you wouldn't really see anything at the surface except for these access ports. Water comes in here, maybe it's carrying some vegetation or debris or particulates. It basically gets streamed out here up at the top. The water basically moves through there, and any fine sediments or sand basically would settle out in this first chamber. Water then sort of flows over into this next chamber, and you get finer and finer particles that settle out. And so this can be basically vacuumed out and maintained every so often. And then water that has been filtered then basically moves downstream, and we retain a large portion of the pollutants that might be coming off the developed landscape. Cisterns or rain barrels are a pretty common practice. A lot of people are pretty familiar with those as well. Cisterns are probably one of the most common or oldest practices that we utilize in low impact development. These can be either underground or above ground, and the main key here is that whenever we're putting cisterns or rain barrels on a site, the key is that there has to be a use that goes with that water. Basically the storage has to be recovered after, in between storm events, so that you're able to have some volume available to capture that water and store it in between storm events and then use it in between those events as well. Green roofs are also a wonderful type of practice. Typically they store about an inch of rainfall on the rooftop. One of the things here is that these need to be engineered or designed into the original development of the building. It's not really something that's feasible to retrofit or kind of go back in and add. But it can be a great addition if there's new development or new infrastructure going. I think one of the more common or more famous ones, I guess, for Florida right now is here in Escambia County at the, what's the name of the building?
Central Office Complex.
It's a what?
Central Office
Central Office Complex, yeah. So yeah.
But you can't enjoy it.
Well, that's kind of something that comes into play, like the designing, if you can figure out access. And roof access is always that's always a tricky thing depending on where you're at.
Where is that at?
The Central Office.
Park Place.
Is it like
Fairfield.
kind of near Fairfield across the hill?
By,
It's called a one-stop shop.
I have actually not been there. So where is it?
you know where the Waffle House is on Fairfield, the pawn shop? It's that building just to the north west.
Are you not allowed up there, or do you have to make special accommodations?
Yeah, you have to get somebody to take you up there, because even going up the steps is not very easy. It's a ladder, basically.
We have one in Gainesville. We had one on campus. It wasn't maintained very well. It's one of the original ones, probably from about 10 or 15 years ago. Plants didn't work out. They put another one on the Greenville Utilities, the Gainesville Utilities building, and they've got basically a door that you can kind of go through and tour. We actually put a video up on UF's website about showing it off. It's really nice. One did a nice job of it. So when we think about kind of moving to the retrofit idea, or we have this existing landscape out here, and there's a lot of places where there's underground utilities, there's buildings, you've got to have source area where water's coming from, and then you got to figure out an area where you're going to capture and maybe put that in the ground. So it gets a little bit tricky, and so we're oftentimes limited by the space that is in the urban environment. And so finding those opportunities are typically can be one of the bigger challenges. So oftentimes we'll see, for example, a common retrofit is taking parking islands or traffic islands and putting a cut in the curb and excavating that out. And you've got sort of a depressional area where it can capture runoff from the parking lot, and water goes into that soil and can then soak into the soil there and reduce the amount of runoff that goes into that storm system. Kind of gonna skip ahead here, but this kind of just looks at sort of the different practices that are available in different types of sections of the rural to urban interface, and looking at where can we cite those. So basically, a lot of these practices are looking at, for example, reducing the impervious area. How do we limit that? That may or may not be feasible in all cases, but one of the main things that can be done is disconnecting impervious areas. I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about in one of the next slides, where we look at sort of what is one of the things that homeowners can do to very quickly make a difference on runoff reduction. Curbs, if we can basically eliminate curbs or use cuts to incorporate rain gardens. Fertilizer reduction, basically reducing the amount of fertilizer we're putting down, can reduce the amount of nutrients that are going into the environment. And then street sweeping. A lot of times we see street sweepers that are maybe going around the streets in town. Those are actually taking up quite a bit of the pollutants and sediments that oftentimes get washed into our waterways. So it's very effective. This is sort of the example here I was talking about with homeowners. You see right here, you've got the gutters that come off the rooftop, and it may be natural to kind of say, well, let's just direct these right onto the sidewalk or onto the driveway, and then it goes into the gutter and into the stormwater pipes, and then into whatever stormwater management or conveyance facility might be available. But if you look here, we've got some very appropriate, and it looks like this area could use a little more water. Basically redirecting these downspouts into the pervious area. This disconnects that impervious area and allows for that water to be filtered as it moves across there and infiltrated, so that any water that isn't infiltrated has at least been filtered and moves through this vegetation before it goes onto the sidewalk. So it's something that we can do as homeowners, just to kind of give you that. So there's a lot of different ways that this can be incorporated into the landscape and into the urban landscape. We have different ways of sort of non-structural, structural and flow controls and so forth. I kind of want to hit on just one more thing, and then I'll turn it over to Matt. And that's one of my favorite quotes here, is that by Kurt Vonnegut, that another flaw in the human character is that everybody wants to build, no one wants to do maintenance. We always want to have the best and the brightest, the newest thing, but it's always kind of, to kind of keep it up, that's always the hard part to do. And so all of these basically require a lot of maintenance. So nothing works perpetually. So we have sort of pipes being clogged here with sediment, permeable pavement maybe clogging with some sediment here, drains being clogged. So there's a maintenance aspect to these that needs to be upkeep. And so I will kind of leave it there and turn it back over to Matt.
Thanks.
So yeah, kind of give an overview of green infrastructure.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. I've been drinking coffee, so I'm really already done. All right, thanks. So yeah, if you could just bring up the presentation again. So the objective of this project, calm down a little bit. The objective of the project is to see how features like these might be able to reduce flooding and improve water quality here in the neighborhoods that we choose to work in. We choose to work in the neighborhoods based on input from the community. So hopefully we'll be able to get some input from you a little later in these maps for places where flooding occurs, where you're concerned about water quality. The process that we'll go through to do that is that we'll collect we'll use computer simulations to show how adding features such as the ones that Evan talked about will change the hydrology, change the water quality. So change the flooding conditions, change what we see in the water. So these computer simulations, we use one that the Environmental Protection Agency put together that Evan has a lot of experience using. But to make that accurate, then we need to collect rainfall information from the area, stream flow information, and water quality information. So over the course of the next 2 years, we'll be collecting rainfall data, but we'll also be measuring stream flow in these streams that drain out of these areas. We'll be collecting water quality. We'll be sampling water using stormwater samplers to see what's in the water as well. And then we'll use those data to more accurately portray what's in the water and how things might improve with these types of features. So that said, I just wanted to show a little about I get really excited about the hydrological part, especially like the rainfall. We've got great rainfall data for this area. I always like to just start by, so I'll just walk, you can humor me for like 10 more minutes, I'll talk about this rainfall data. This is a rainfall map of the United States. All right, we live down here, right? This is among the areas of the U.S. with the heaviest rainfall, right? We get, how much rain do we get in a year? 67 inches, right? It's incredible. Last year we got how much? At Pensacola Airport, how much was recorded?
It was 70 something.
It was 90 last year. In fact, actually, I forgot to have that information. So these just kind of close up with Florida. This is like the range of rainfalls in some areas in the 40s. Yeah, we get in the mid to upper 60s of rainfall. There are a lot of stations across the United States where rainfall is measured. These are all places that if you were to go onto the internet, onto the Weather Services database, these are all stations where rainfall goes. These are all places where rainfall is measured. You see these points here. If we zoom into our area, these are all rainfall stations. Not all of these still record data. Some of them may only have a few data, but many of them have, like especially the ones at the airports and the airfields have decades and decades of data, of very high quality rainfall data. So this is kind of information that we use as inputs for some computer simulations. I think this is just interesting because we were talking a little earlier about how much rain we get in this area. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 locations in the Panhandle. This is the annual rainfall 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 18. You can see that at the Pensacola airports, we received 90 inches last year, 91, 92 inches the year before. This is a station nearby at the ECUA offices, which are, I guess, just north of I-10 off Scenic Highway. And their rainfall gauge actually went out during the tropical storm Gordon, so there were about 12 more inches of rain that they didn't record, that the airport received, that they just didn't record rainfall those days.
How can 2014 be lower than
Yes, isn't that interesting?
2017 and
It only
18?
rained once.
It's
Well, that's why it
possible-
only rained
right,
once,
that's
one
true.
day.
Right, because we got 20 inches of rain. It's
That's right,
possible
that's right.
so it's possible that the rain gauge wasn't working. And it's also possible, like, for example, like this year, so this is
Yeah.
through 2018. So this is the rain that we've got so far this year. You can see how far below we are so far. We've got 3 more months, maybe we'll catch up. But if we had had that much otherwise, other than that 21 inches of rain, then it would be something like 60 to 70 inches of rain. So there's a lot of variation from year to year, just kind of interesting to think about. Yeah, so this is, sometimes it rains, but when it rains, sometimes it pours, not everywhere. There are a lot of opportunities for us today to collect rainfall information and all kinds of climate information ourselves and share that with the greater community. There's a particular website, the Weather Underground website. I don't know if people have explored that before. Some of you have, right? So you can go online and see. Let's see, do I have a map of? So you see where people have these weather stations. So you can go on the internet, buy a weather station. They're kind of expensive. I think they range from $300 to $1,000. So they're a little steep. But it puts the data, all this weather data, onto the internet for the community to look at. In our area, so it might be things like temperature. This is from last month. Temperature, wind speed, was this wind direction, then precipitation as well. This is over it's just a one day period. There are a lot of these weather underground stations. There are about 200 in Santa Rosa and Escambia counties. One of the things that we can do that is we can look at how much rain occurred in an event and kind of the spatial variation of rainfall over how much it varies from one place to the next in our area. So this is it rained a lot in Gulf Breeze. My colleague Shelley Alexander, who works for Santa Rosa County, talked about, they call this a rain bomb. I guess that's the NOAA term that they use, is just really intense rainfall in a small area. So we can see in our weather underground stations in the area, it rained a lot in Gulf Breeze as much as, so if we look up here, these are the color codes. The green is 0 to a ½ inch, blue is 1 to 2, this light blue is 1 to 2 inches, all the way to, now we're looking at this kind of almost, the darkest color is 3 to 5 inches, and then 5 to 8 inches out here in Gulf Breeze, and that's over the course of the day. So it's interesting because it rains so heavy here, but not nearly as heavy in Pensacola or up in Milton. It's the same thing for this one. Oh, this is just a different date. So yeah, we can use this for different dates. So that's a really interesting tool. Also, NOAA has recently developed a map of rainfall, kind of that they use based on radar, so they can actually they can estimate what the entire rainfall over the area is as a series of boxes. So that it looks something like, if here's our area, for an event, it might look something like, it's a little abstract for a second, but something like this. Okay, so this is just showing the rainfall over our area as these boxes. What this is showing is that in some areas it rained heavy. I'm going to go one more. So in some areas, this is the same day. In some areas it's heavy rainfall, and in other areas it's not as heavy. This is just showing this idea of the differences in rain from one place to the next. Then we get an event like the Tropical Storm Gordon, where it just rained really heavy September 5th and 6th. This is showing, so this is like, in this area, for those 2 days, it rained 10 to 12, 12 to 14 inches in a couple days, and that was just last year. Yeah, and some of that water ends up in the stream, so we'll be measuring streams, stream flow, the amount of water in streams, we use these current meters. I've got some cool tools up here that I'll take out as well when we go back to look at the maps to show how we measure stream flow, how much water is in creeks, current meters like these. But there's some other tools we can use on that side. Skip that. This is kind of interesting. So the way that we develop these water records is we end up with water level recordings and stream flow data, ultimately stream flow data every 15 minutes. So it's a process that's a little dull. Especially, I don't know if you find the rainfall, I find much more interesting. But as Evan suggested, the watershed characteristics affect stream flow. So a forested watershed might have different hydrologic characteristics or different runoff patterns than an urbanized place or residential place. In fact, I worked with a graduate student recently who recorded some stream flow data in our area, and in Carpenter's Creek in Pensacola, and she found, so she looked at 3 sites from upstream to downstream, so the purple line represents the most highly urbanized, so with lots of parking lots. This is actually by the movie theater and the Publix, if you know where that is. So we have this really fast runoff that kind of along the lines of what Evan was alluding to. We have this rapid runoff off parking lots, and then this slower peak of maybe off the residential area or from upstream. And we see that the peaks in more residential areas, this orange line, blue lines don't show that same pattern.
That's because it was clogged.
We saw this pretty consistently. I don't think it's because it's clogged. I think it's just that.
Oh, it's not anymore. Lori Murphy and her organization.
Oh yeah, she's done a lot of great stuff to clean up the creeks for sure.
Yeah.
But we see this pattern at almost every event in the creek, where we just get this rapid runoff from the parking lot.
Oh, sure. I get you now.
Yeah. We'd love to get your input on where flooding is an issue, where water quality is an issue. We've got these maps in the back here. We've got a few places we were thinking about, especially in Santa Rosa County, places like Metron Estates, Florida Town. A lot of people talk about Holly by the Sea. There's some areas around Pensacola as well, around Palafox Park, the Town and Country Plaza, not far from the Escambia County Central Office Complex. But we really, the more input we get from the community, the more useful our project can be. Our goal is to try to make things better for the people who live here. So we can go back to the maps. If you have any questions about things that Evan or I talked about, feel free to ask us either now or you can ask us later. And yes.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. Gloria Horning, I'm with several national organizations, and I've been doing public science work since 1993, environmental issues. And I'm also a certified stormwater inspector. We do have several communities that I can't think, Lori Murphy may know more than I do about some of these communities, but I know where they are. And Town and Country is a good one. Warrington would be fantastic. There's also one, it's off of Mobile Highway, and it's a huge problem. And tonight is their meeting, so they're not going to be here. So I'd be happy to introduce you to communities that are underwater a lot.
Yeah, sure, that would be great. We've got these maps here, so we could mark on those.
The other thing is there's already some programs. My organizations, they're not my organizations, but I work with Public Forum. We're doing rain analysis now. We have 5 gauges across Escambia County. We do adopt a drain and have people, adopt a drain and then they keep it clean. So there are some citizen action working here, and we need more.
Yeah.
Absolutely need more. Did y'all go to the university, or I should say Colorado University's, the Science and Citizen Workshop? It was over 1,000 people there. It was the largest ever, of bringing public and scientists together. You might want to check into them. They're very cool, very progressive. And so is my organization, and we're national, and we're the largest flood surviving organization in the United States. And I can tell you New Jersey's underwater right now. Charleston is underwater right now. We have the largest flood video library in the country. Wisconsin's underwater right now, and there's no real event, and we know our poor friends in Houston and Port Arthur, it's horrific of what's happening to them again. I live in the tan yard, and several of those pictures that you showed was my home.
Yes, right.
Okay, so one of the issues that I would highly suggest you look at is having already looked at this, and I was saying I would love to help y'all any way I can, because no reason to reinvent the wheel, because we've got some of the work done already.
Sure.
Especially environmental impact reports. Is when they built downtown, the government section, they didn't allot for any water runoff, because at that time, the community known as the Tan Yard, and this is right here, it was a low social economic community with no political funds or anything like that. So they didn't care if they flooded down here. And what's happening now is the city is wanting to build and build and build on top of green spaces that we have now that flood. They flood all by themselves and they're big 19-acre green spots because we don't have the infrastructure. So talk to these cats and tell them, you know, you can't do this without, you know, consequences. The sea level rise is real. In Gordon, I barely got an inch of rain at my house. Weird. Flooded everywhere from high tide. High tide. And I talked to the engineer, I said, you know, you could put reverse pumps, you could put flaps, oh, that'd cost too much. So they'd just rather have a community flood. So, and they didn't care. Now they're starting to care because now $300,000 homes are coming in and things like that, but they built the homes without the infrastructure.
Just build them on stilts.
And they're still not requiring enough, they're stacking them right on top of each other.
Right.
I mean, how
No
is
green
that they
space.
built on top of the swamp to begin with?
Yeah. And our retention pond down here doesn't work because it's in water. They dug in water.
You got tailwater conditions.
Yes, and so it's always full.
Yeah.
So these are things that, you know, I love the public input, but if once you take that public input, can we just pound it onto the politician's head and say, listen, this is what's gonna happen, because FEMA rates are gonna go up next year by 18%. For your flood insurance, folks, 18%. Who can afford that? And, you know, they keep building and building. But I'm so excited that you're here, and I will do everything I can, and I'll take you to the communities. I know the communities, I know the people in the communities, and they would welcome you. Thank you.
I just wanted to add, I spent 30-something years with ECUA, and 25 years of it was at this downtown plant, where we were in a glass building, and when it would rain, we would watch 18-wheelers go in front of the plant, and their headlights would go underwater. That's how deep it would get in front. Okay, I just want to know, I've been part of some discussions to open Spring Street back up, because Spring Street is where Washerwoman's Creek was. And they put it in the huge storm drain, and the idea among some people is, and I think this is valid, to open that storm drain back up. to
Daylight.
make-
They call it daylight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Daylight industry.
And doing a road diet on Spring Street, because Spring Street is wide, hardly gets into traffic at all. And that's what I was wondering, if anybody is seriously considering the obvious.
Well, absolutely, they did, but the problem is where it runs under Old Stinky, or where Old Stinky used to be, they've got 4 feet of concrete on top of it. It's where all the sewage
Oh, okay.
tanks were, okay? And it's right down here.
Oh, right.
So they put 4 feet of concrete on it to mitigate it. And so they're saying they can't go through that to open up Washerwoman's Creek. I disagree. I think they could open it up and it could flood up. I mean, they don't have to cut the whole thing. But I'm not an engineer. Don't play one on TV. But, you know, I've been to a lot of places who figured out
If you
harder
got rooms
things.
available at Holiday Express tonight.
Okay, good. So that's, and it is a great idea. I think that Old Stinky would be a great wetlands project to educate the youth and all of our problems.
Prime real estate.
Well, it's not gonna be prime real estate once it's
Not with
underwater.
water.
I mean, there was this like a month ago, in the mid, like at 2
Right.
o'clock in the afternoon, it poured for 30 minutes, and there was 10 inches of water all over our, I
Mhm.
mean, it's crazy.
I've got videos of East Hill, Ninth Avenue towards the mall, and there were garbage cans floating down the street. It was a half-hour rain.
Yeah.
Literally, I saw a half-hour on my window of
I catch cars all the time in front of my house.
Was that, I think that was this one, I had a snapshot of where it rained 4 inches in a half an hour or something. It was, I think it was this. Was that sound like August? Would that have been August?
Yeah, it was like, no problems.
Yeah. Anyway, that's interesting. So these maps are back here. We've got some Sharpies. Go ahead and write on there, write notes. The more permanent it is, the less likely we are to lose it. So write on the maps. But the post-it notes, I'm a little concerned about the post-it notes. So go ahead and write.
Go ahead and write on the map.
Yeah.
We'll be coming around and kind of talking with you as well, and trying to.
Well, and what about doing something about the current retention areas that we have as far as cleaning and water going through? So for instance, like in the Warrington area, you've got the big Jones Creek, Jones Swamp, and then there's another one up farther north, is that right? You said something farther? So basically, both of those go into my Chico. You've got a lot of older homes with septic still. Those septic systems have a bottom to begin with. Everything from the lots, I mean, you've got tons of commercial there, so you've got between the roads and parking lots and things like that, just constant nastiness in there, and it's constantly testing for. So what can we do to clean it before it gets in here?
Yeah, that's a great question. Can we hold the water back?
Adopt a drain.
There aren't any drains where I live.
Oh.
I live right on my Chico, and like, I watch all the water just pour in, and then I have my little grabber thingy, and I grab the garbage, and
Good, don't touch it.
ECUA did qualify for grant for septic tank, for doing more hookups.
and
I don't know, but the
I
thing
know
is,
Lake
there was
Woodland-
no area designated to get the money for the septic
The
tank.
problem with that is, like
Who
in
knows?
Beach Haven,
Who knows where they'll end up doing it? For instance, where my son lives, where they don't have them because of all the trees, there's no problem with water. But there's no, it's all
because of the
septic
trees,
system,
yeah.
right? So, who knows, they could decide to do it in that neighborhood because it's a nice thing.
Well, the problem is, with like ECUA, is the county commissioners here are totally, like, if you put it in Beach Haven, they're spending $12 million to do the roads, and I don't know if anybody's aware of that, and put new sewer and everything, but nobody has to hook up.
Right, you're not
My wife and I,
requirement.
my wife was born here, I was born in Jacksonville, we met in South Florida. South Florida, when you put in sewage, everybody's hooked up, they raise your water, your meter about $10 a month, forever.
Actually, that's
And
not
then everybody
true.
is hooked up.
That's not true. I live in Beach Haven as well, and they're running sanitary sewer in Beach Haven.
Right.
But if you don't hook on, 2 years later, 24 months later, they pull your septic permit. So your septic system can never be repaired.
I understand.
You
Right.
have to hook on.
Well, they ought to do it, when they're digging the road, just dig to your house
They
and
give you
connect.
a huge rate break if you will go ahead and hook on.
It won't be that much,
Well, no.
because they'll do it, they can do it bond, they already spending $12
You know
million.
what the
State
you know
has
what the
actually
tax
provided
charge
quite
is
a bit of
gonna
money.
be if you wait 2 years?
Well, it's gonna cost a lot more
Oh, at
than it
least
would
that.
today, yeah.
Actually, it's only
The Rebuild
$800.
Northwest Florida project will help it too.
But that's why we have the issue.
The Rebuild
Let's
Northwest
just
Florida project,
kind of
they'll
scope the discussion and the
They'll pay,
projects
they'll
here.
pay half.
So there's a lot of different ways that development and urbanization can affect our water bodies. We can have an industry that puts pollutants in, we can have septic systems, we can have stormwater runoff. What our scope is tonight is really looking at the issues that are stormwater related. That's sort of the focus of ours. So septic is a huge problem and definitely something we need to address and look at. But it's not in our, it's not what we can do with this project.
And Pervious.
Not your
Well,
will.
we're only 4 blocks away from one of our 7 Superfund sites.
Huh.
So when it rains, it goes right in there.
There's a meeting on that on the 15th.
Yeah, they wanna-
Peter Thorpe is gonna be here.
You know, one of the things we're seeing with a lot of Superfund sites is that they're great, they end up being great opportunities for, they're usually pretty large in old parts of cities, and they can, I've seen
And-
several cases where they turn into basically stormwater parks, where they've been excavated and basically remediate or remove all the contaminated soil. But you can kind of get several different funding,
How long has creosote's been going on?
This
It's
one?
in 20, no, the,
I don't know this particular
Or-
piece
I
of
got a
property.
house in East Hill and I got 12 grand from the creosote.
Oh, right, right,
But that's been going on decades.
decades.
You know, I,
Mhm.
So they want to turn it into a park where you can like bicycle through it. or you
Oh,
can
this
run
one.
around the park. Yes,
This one,
this
yeah.
here. Which would make more sense than what they've done with some of the other brown fields, which they cemented them, they plugged them, so now we're just gonna do anything.
But they,
There's a group looking for a place to put a dog park. They got nixed, putting it under the interstate. And I had suggested to somebody that this American creosote site would be a good place to put a dog park. because it's another place
if
where
they
people
concrete
can
it
sit down.
first and take all that topsoil, right now, it's not even a brown field, it's still contaminated.
Yeah.
I don't want my dog on it.
So keep them out of 11 Mile Creek.
Well, if you would, please take some time and, please, sort of put your thoughts down on the maps. And that would be great input for our, work. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you all for coming tonight.
There's lots of coffee in the back. Can slide it right by your
no problem.
When I ride my bike down when I pass, so I still yeah. You see, I grew up here, so when we would go down Main Street to town, I could smell, you smell the fish. And every once in a while, I'd be right, I mean, if I'm out, you smell it. You smell the creosote that was there.
Now granted, I like down on.
I know the people in there. But I remember every time we go around that, you know, go down the grass, you smell the
Yeah.
Well, I used to swim there when I was growing up. And buy a Chico, and that was 16. Boats, but anyway, I just was riding my bike down there, Joe Patty. And I just had a whiff and it brought back memories. That and that was when I go down to the sewer with us. If I had across the, I could still smell the same smell. It's, and they were gonna put cement.
Excuse me.
Yes, yes.
I'm on the city's environmental advisory board, and I'm going to be talking to the guy that's in charge of all the stormwater faults and everything the next week. I committed to it today at our meeting. But the other thing I'm interested in, I'm with a volunteer organization that collects garbage along our beaches, trash. And last year we picked up 18,000 pounds on the beaches. And we're trying to figure out how can we find out what stormwater drain can we put something on the end of and see what actually comes out.
That's interesting.
Any ideas?
I don't know, but
I might have better ideas of what kinds of structures can go on.
There's one over in Santa Rosa that we were supposed to go visit, but it didn't happen.
I know I've seen pictures of them, but I don't know
Yep.
much about how they work.
So we're just looking for ideas to do something like that.
Do you have an idea for what kinds of things you can put on stormwater drains to catch garbage and see what's coming out of them?
Yeah, there are some, so a lot of times you can put there are these filters on, that can go on the catch basin on the inlet side. And that can be,
So the big thing in Pensacola, is you can have really great ideas. The city will buy into them, and then they don't provide anything back. That's what's happening with street funds. It's big donor contention.
Let me, back this.
Kelvin's fine.
They're not there anymore.
Yeah, I'll look a little more into that. That's something we'll talk about for sure next time.
She's down there tonight.
If you kind of cross anything, I'll give you my email address.
What's the name of this community?
Mayfair.
Keep that on there and kind of describe the issues or the blocks that you have. More flooding issues?
It's called,
How would you say?
Yeah, stormwater.
Outlet?
Yeah.